recording. Okay. And you can just look at me. All right, tell me, what's your name?
William Smith.
Okay. And where are you from?
I'm originally from Middlesboro, Kentucky.
Uh-huh. Born and raised?
Born and raised.
What year was you born?
I was born in 1942.
And tell me a little bit, what neighborhood did you grow in Middlesboro?
Initially, we were in the coal camp north of Middlesboro. Everybody called it Primary, but I think it's pronounced Premier.
Okay.
And that was in my early parts of my life. But now I was born and raised in Middlesboro. My father was a coal miner. And then when coal started to booming again, he went to the Edgewood area to work in the mines. And then we moved up close to the coal camp, but not right at the coal camp, and stayed there 5 or 6 years, and then moved back to Middlesboro. And I come out of what they call the Rhine area. That's over on the east end of Middlesboro.
Tell me a little bit about your parents. You mentioned your dad was a coal miner. What was his name?
His name was John Robert Smith. He was a senior. He was a retired coal miner. I think he ended up with about 36 years in the mines. My mother was Myra Lenora Smith, born and raised in Edgewood, which is a little town up from No Town, Kentucky. And of course matter of fact, she was 106 when she died. She died last October. So.
What was her maiden name?
She was a Booker.
Okay. And so she was from Middlesboro. Was your dad from Middlesboro?
No, he come out of a little place called Oconee, South Carolina. He was a World War I veteran, and he got out of, they released him from service in, I think it was 1919. He went in 1918. No, I'm sorry. Went in 1917. He got released in 1919, and they released him in Hopewell, Georgia, which was a little city outside of Oconee, South Carolina. And then he worked and did commercial type, road type work, and come into Kentucky in the early 20s.
Do you remember any of the companies that he worked for? Any of the coal companies up here?
No, Garmita had a mine. That's where he worked out of during the time. I don't really know. See, I was just a little bitty fella. And I don't really know. Other than Garmita mines, it was 3 or 4 other mines in that hollow. But I remember him being at Garmita mines.
Do you remember any of the other families that were in some of those coal camps?
Yes, I probably remember them most after we left the camp and come back into Middlesboro. When I lived, or when we lived in Premier, which was probably 4 or 5 miles from the coal mine itself, we had a family of Thompsons. Amos Thompson was the daddy, and I believe Mandy Thompson was the mother. Matter of fact, one of my brothers ended up marrying one of the Thompson girls. So, and after we moved back to Middlesboro, we understood that over a period of 3, 4 years, coal was up and down. Sometimes it was booming, other times it wasn't. And folks normally migrated back out of the Monarch Premier area and come back to Middlesboro, and then you found out that it was several families up there. I had a Bo Sweet, Waters family. It was several up there.
What do you remember your dad doing during the bust years or bust times?
Well, after he got out of the mines, he sort of he
Okay, sorry about that.
that's no problem. After he got out of the mines, because see, when the mines was booming, the miners didn't make hardly anything. I've got some old pay stubs from my father where he would clear like $17 or $18 a week. So, you know, that was back during the days when the miners mined, used shovel, picks, and forks, you know, to load the coal. And then they used animals to pull the coal guns and little guns out that they put the coal on. And then they dumped it at the tipple, and then trucks would load it from the tipple and take it out. Far from what they got today with the big auger system, and the best they had back there was workers and dynamite when he was in the mine.
Tell me about your school. When did you start going to school, and what schools did you go to?
I went to, well, they had it was called Lincoln High here in Middlesboro. That was during the segregated times. And that was the only black school in Middlesboro. But it was a part of the Middlesboro education system. And I went there until I got 18-year-old and I was in my senior class. I needed 3 credits to graduate, so I got a wild hair and decided to go in the military.
You sure did,
huh? So, of course, once I got in the military, they made you complete your high school, and then I've got some college under my belt now. So, but this is the only school I ever attended was Lincoln High School, which is no longer, the site is there, but they tore the school down. I'd have to guess I was overseas at the time. I'm thinking sometime in the 70s they tore the old school down.
Tell me about your enlistment in the military, and kind of, was that your first time out of your community? And tell me that tale and what some of the stuff that struck you.
Well, yes, that was the first time out of the community. Military during my era was a way out of these little small cities. The work was 0 to nothing, just about it. Even the black people that had degrees worked as janitors and did domestic work, and the town, Middlesboro, consisted of 3 or 4 large families, and they controlled everything. So of course, you know, when jobs come available in some of your stores and different places like that, of course they would hire their family. That makes sense. So most of the black youth, when they become of age in my era, went in the military. Then a lot of them, I went in and stayed, by the way, but a lot of them did not. And we've got some rich history that come out of Middlesboro. You know, doctors, lawyers, you name it, and we've got it.
People that left here and went on to achieve.
Achieve, yes.
Yeah. So where'd you end up? Did you retire out?
I retired at 21 years and 4 months out of the military. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I spent a little over 10 months in Vietnam. I was wounded, and they sent me from Vietnam back to Walter Reed Hospital. I stayed there for a little over a month. At the time, Now, this was in early '67, March, April time frame. At the time, we had so many wounded soldiers in Walter Reed that they formed you out to other hospitals. For instance, me, I could walk. I had a brace on my back. I could walk and move pretty good, but I wasn't taking really any medication other than Darvon. That was the strongest thing they had back in those days, other than morphine, you know. So they sent me home for a couple of months to rehabilitate myself because they didn't have room for me at Walter Reed. So I stayed here in Middlesboro for about 60 days and then went on to Fort Meade, Maryland. By me not being able to do my combat duties anymore, they moved me into I was one of the chief NCOs of the confinement facility. And I run into the guys that didn't want to go to Vietnam, you know, so I stayed in Maryland for a little over a year. And then I got assigned to Alaska, believe it or not. Stayed in Alaska for 3 years. Come back from Alaska, went to Fort Monroe, Virginia, right off of Norfolk area, in the Tidewater area. I stayed there for 4 years. Come down on orders to go to Germany. Stayed at Stuttgart, Germany for 3 years. Come back from Germany, went to Oklahoma, Fort Sill. Stayed at Fort Sill for about 2.5 years. Turned right around, went back to Germany for another 3 years. So I spent a little time moving around while I was in the military.
Was there anything that you can think of, this is kind of off question a little bit, but that you feel like you, growing up in this area, an advantage that it gave you when you went out into the world? Like things that you were taught here that when you went out to the world that kind of gave you a little bit of an advantage?
Well, normally, the smaller the place that you're raised, the better off, because this old saying about it takes a village to raise a child, well, that's true. When I was raised here in Middlesboro, Aunt Lulu seen you down the street doing something you had no business. Guess what? Mom found out about it, and then you got straightened out. The neighbors, even if they were adult neighbors, you know, they see you doing something, I'm gonna tell on you, you know. And some of them were in the position where they pat your little hind end if you're out from home. Said, I'm gonna tell your mother, and I'll tell her that I spanked you, and that was okay, long as it was an adult, and you know, with some credibility. So, as you reared in these little small cities, it's more of a close-knit. Once you get out into the bigger cities, you realize that nobody knows hardly anybody. And once you get close-knit with a person or an individual, even in the big cities, then it means more, because then they become your family, you know. Everybody knew everybody in Middlesboro. But in some of the larger cities I've been to, you don't even know your next door neighbor. So it gives you, being reared in a small city, it just gives you a little more cohesiveness, you know, to a feeling of togetherness. And the military does that too as you leave and go somewhere, because then you get hooked up with military people, and then they become your extended families.
So when did you come back to Middlesboro?
I come back in 1998. I retired from the military in 1982. And I stayed in the Fort Knox Radcliffe area for about 15 years. I got out and got a job working at a dealership. I was a service manager, service director, and then shop foreman, and realized that my mother at the time was still living here. And with nobody else here, see, I come from a family of 7, and all my siblings, matter of fact, all of them's dead now, but back during that time, my one brother was in the military. He retired, and he was, matter of fact, he stayed in Germany for about 20-some years, and then come back to the States. My other sisters and brother, all except one, had left Middlesboro. So Daddy had passed. He died in 1976, and 75, I'm sorry. And Mother was literally by herself here. So I decided to move back to Middlesboro.
What were the names? Were the names of your siblings?
My oldest brother was, believe it or not, I had 2 brothers that only had the initials. My oldest brother was W.J. Smith, and the brother below him was J.W. Smith. That's what they named him. Of course, when they went in the military, believe it or not, you couldn't come in with just the initials. They give you a name. They give them a name. Well, one of them was Wesley Jr. and one of them was John Wesley. That was just a law, I guess. Then my oldest sister, her name was Ruth. The sister below her was Myra Jean. And my sister below her, which I say my baby sister, because I was the youngest out of the 7. Her name was Julia Ann. Then I had another brother called John. He was a junior. All since have passed, by the way. I'm the only one left out of the Smith clan.
Wow.
And my mother, she passed away last October at 106.
Where is your father buried at?
He's buried at Lynch Cemetery here in Middlesboro.
Is your mother buried there?
No, I buried my mother at the Green Hills Memorial. Lynch Cemetery is another, what do I want to say? It's full of history. When I come in the military up until the early 70s, anything other than white Americans, you were buried at Lynch Cemetery. Even a lot of the founding fathers of Middlesboro, they've got them buried at Lynch Cemetery. I buried my mother at Green Hills simply because you have no caretaker at Lynch Cemetery, and it's growed up quite a bit now. And the only thing that gets cleaned is individual people will come out in county, clean their own grave sites. But all of my family, other than I got 2 brothers at Lynch Cemetery, and then I got my mother's mother, Julia. Her name was Sally, but for some reason they called her Julia, and she's buried there. I've got an uncle, Jim Kyle. He's buried there. I've got an aunt. Her name was Elizabeth. She was a Kyle, but her married name was Staples. She's buried there. So I've got a lot of folks buried at Lynch Cemetery. If I had not been the last one in the clan, I would have probably buried Mother there too. But after I'm gone, I don't know. I've got couple of nieces and nephews that's locally. But I looked at it this way: nobody would even have known where her grave was, most likely. So that's the reason I buried her at Green Hills.
Did you remember your grandparents, your father's parents, or your mother's? You mentioned your mother's mother. Do you tell me about them? Those sets of.
See, my father's parents, I didn't know. He come out of, he come out of a little place called Connie, South Carolina. He joined the military 1918, First World War. They let him out in, no, joined 1917. They let him out in 1919, I believe. And he stayed down in that area. They let him out in Hopewell, Georgia. He stayed in that area and worked himself up through Tennessee and into Kentucky, where he married my mother. But he was from a mixed family. I don't know whether that was the reason why he didn't ever say anything about his family. He would tell Mother, but the era that I come up in, Daddy didn't talk to kids. You know, you ain't old enough to know anything about what I'm telling you. So, and I knew his mother's name was Mary Jane. Don't know her last name. All I knew, he said his father had been in the military. This is my father's father. But he never said much about him. He never even mentioned it, really, his name. And me and my youngest daughter and my wife, we went to Oconee down there about, I think it was 2009, 2010. Looked around trying to look up some of his ancestry. We found his mother at the courthouse and the date when she died, but when we went to the cemetery, we couldn't locate her, so we didn't dig up nothing else on him. But now my mother, she was out of Manchester, but she was born and raised in Middlesboro, a little place called Edgewood, Kentucky, which is western end of Bell County. And all of her people was from the Manchester area. She had several. Matter of fact, she come out of the family of 10. And she had 2 brothers and 8 sisters. But now she had a little tragic in her family because back, what I gathered, see, because Mother wasn't at the time. Mother was like 3-year-old when her daddy got killed, right in the Garmita area. And that was, his name was Wayman Booker. Now, that was my grandfather. I never met him because I was, he was, matter of fact, he got killed and Mother was like 3 or 4 years old. So he was gone way before I even thought about. But now I've got to spend some time with my mother's mother, my grandmother. That was, her name was, her real name was Sally, but everybody knows her as Julie. And that was 1957, I think, when she passed. She's buried in Lynch Cemetery.
Do you know her maiden name? What her maiden name?
Yeah, she was a Booker.
She was a Booker.
Yeah.
She's a Booker that married a Booker.
Right. No, she was
Your grandma's maiden name.
Oh, my grandma's maiden name. She was a Neal.
A Neal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I guess Manchester, that's more of an agricultural community.
Golly, I think the only time I'd been to Manchester area, they call it Clay County. Oh Lord, I was probably 10 or 11. And it's so close. I don't know why we never, as a family, looked up her family. We didn't.
You feel like you already knew some of it anyway, so it wasn't a mystery like your
wasn't
dad.
a big mystery like Dad.
Yeah.
Now I was able, I put my hands on a copy of the census back in 2000. No, I'm sorry, it's 1910. And it showed, if I'm not mistaken, it showed my grandmother, my grandfather, and my grandmother's mother, which was a lady called Lucinda Neal. And when my daughter run down that was 1910, when she looked on the 19 and 20 census, Granddad wasn't there. Of course, he got killed during that era. But great-grandma was there, Lucinda. Huh. And then Mother showed up there on the, because she's born in, she was born in 1915. So she showed up as being, I think she was about 3 or 4 years old.
So it's 3 generations
Yeah.
on one piece of paper.
Right.
So let's go back a little bit. Tell me a little bit about your school days and what you remember about Lincoln, and yeah, just whatever you want people to know about your
Right.
time there.
It was small school. Like the whole building consists of first grade through 12th grade. First grade, your 1 through 7th grade, 1 through 8th was on the first floor, and then the 9th through 12th was on the second floor. And your each teacher had 2 grades. Like when I started in 1948, you had grade 1 and grade 2, the same teacher. And then grade 3 and grade 4, same teacher, right on up through high school. When I started in 48, we were still living in the Premier area, which is about 4 miles out of town. And I don't know, at times we had to walk home. But now initially, somehow they had a gentleman that used to come up and pick 2 families up, the Smith family and the Thompson family, and bring them to school. But I always remembered walking back home. We didn't get a round trip for whatever reason. I don't know. He's a black gentleman, and I imagine through the school board somehow they were paying him.
Do you remember his name at all?
Everybody called him Capers. Now, you know, whether that was his first name or last name, everybody called him Mr. Capers.
He probably had an afternoon job.
Probably
he had to
did.
go to.
And it was just commonplace. Like I say, everybody knew everybody. If you're black in Middlesboro, you knew everybody and their mamas and their daddies, and you know, the uncles and aunts. And how many churches did we have during that era? 1, 2, 3, 4, probably 5 churches here in Middlesboro, predominantly black churches. School day was 8 till 2:30 or 3, you know, and you commonplace for children. You play before you come to school, and then you play after school, you know. Never been on the school bus in my life because we didn't get transported. But your white children had school buses in the local area, but black children didn't. Little story, I've got a couple, and I might bring them down and give them to the archives here. I've got a couple of school books that our books was free. You didn't have to buy books, but I had some little white buddies that we played with after school, that the books that the white children got, when they recycled them, the black children got the books. And I remember years, because we'd have one of those old, I don't know where they went after we got them. Most of them was so tore up that they probably trashed them. But you went through this drill at the end of the school year. You wasn't supposed to write in them to start with, not in the book. And they give you one of them old big flat erasers, and you had all day to clean up books, you know. But some of them wrote with the ink pen, so you couldn't mark that off. But that was just, we talk about that now, which it wasn't no big thing, but the hand-me-downs, especially the books. And I don't know what the budget was for Lincoln, probably quite low, you know. But it fell under the Middlesboro school system. And the school superintendent for Middlesboro was just over the Lincoln. But now we had our own principal.
Do you remember his name when you was?
Her name was Ball, Esther Ball.
Yesterday.
They've got a lot of information on Esther Ball here in the archive. When they disbanded the school and integrated the school, she was the most qualified black lady in this region. She should have been superintendent of schools, but because of her color, she didn't get the job, so I believe she ended up going and teaching in Louisville, Kentucky. And but like I say, when I was growing up, you couldn't wait to get out of school. You played with your little buddies all in school, and you get out of school, you go home, eat, and then you go back out and play basketball, and, and just.
You were already gone when desegregation happened?
Yeah, I was gone.
Tell me about, do you remember any sports at school, any rivalries or any of the other schools that Middlesboro would play?
Right. I wasn't that well in sports. I played a little basketball, a little baseball. I could play the game, but nothing great. One of the big rivalries I can recall was football, and we'd have to go. We either played Lynch or Benham in our region, and for some reason, not Benham, I'm sorry, Lynch or Harlan, Kentucky. Lynch is a little city in Kentucky too. And to me, that was the big rival. Whether you went to Lynch or Lynch come to your school, it was build up big time.
I've been over to Lynch quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
There's so do you recall any of the students from surrounding areas being at Lincoln, like from Hoop Creek or Hoop Creek or Ewing or any of these other communities coming? Do you remember any of that? Any
coming to Middlesboro?
Yeah, coming to Lincoln to go to school.
No. Everyone that I can remember that was local from Middlesboro.
From Middlesboro.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we didn't know anything about you. Speaking of Hoop Creek, I didn't know anything about Hoop Creek until after I got grown and started meeting grown folks.
Mm-hmm.
And matter of fact, one of those guys that went in the military with me was from Hoop Creek.
What was his last name?
Oh God, Jimmy Yeary.
Yeah, Jimmy Yeary's. Yeah.
Yeary.
Huh.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Churches. You talked about churches. What did your folks go to church? And
yeah, matter of fact, my mother was probably the only female pastor in Middlesboro. Her name was Myra Smith, my mother. And she pastored a little church. Matter of fact, the building is still standing. I don't go to church there anymore. We turned the building over to a gentleman by the name of Tony Francis. But she pastored General Assembly Church of God. It's out off of Ellenwood Road, right in behind Lincoln Home Apartments. It's a little, it's one room. Well, I say one room. It's probably 25 by 50 foot. And she pastored that from, I as a child, I went there. I can remember in the late 40s, 48, 49, 50. And I went there. Of course, you go through a stage in life where they make you go to church, but then you get up so old that they figure you can make your own choices. So once I got up at 16, 17, I didn't have to go to church, so I didn't go. But she pastored that church from, I'm going to say 71 to, she stepped down, oh goodness, 2000 maybe.
Wow. That's longer than I've been alive.
But of course, like I say, the church is still there, still standing.
Mm-hmm.
But
is it still black church or is it?
It's just about everything here now is predominantly white. But you're mixed. You don't have. I don't know of any dwelling right now in Middlesboro that's predominantly black or white.
Yeah. It's all mixed.
Yeah, it's pretty much mixed. You can go wherever you want to go.
You mentioned a couple of other churches. Can you name off any of those? You said there's
Yeah,
probably...
you had Mount Moriah. That's the biggest church, Mount Moriah Baptist. Matter of fact, my grandmother's Sally, she attended there, and I had an uncle Jim Kyle. He attended there. I had an aunt Elizabeth Staples. She attended there, and then her husband was Ed Staples, and he attended there. Now, I believe Mother told me that she initially went to Mount Moriah when she was a child, earlier in life. Somehow she got over into the holiness Pentecostal side, and then she stayed in the Pentecostal side. But her mother, Sally, and 2, 3 of her sisters went, and her grandmother went to Mount Moriah. And that was one of the biggest churches. Now, beside where the Lincoln school was, when they tore the Lincoln school down, it was a Methodist church sitting there, and that was White's Memorial, AME Zion. And it was as big as the Mount Moriah church, which sits on 19th Street. But they tore it down. They bought the property from the church, tore it down, and then the church actually moved out on, what's the name of that little street? Ironwood Road. And it's got a small population now, the church. But we had, those were 2 predominantly black churches. I go to Thankful Baptist. It's off of 19th Street now, me and the wife. That church has been there ever since I can remember. They had church up in Fern Lake area, and I'm trying to think of the name of it. But I say when I was coming up, they probably had predominantly black churches. They probably had 6 maybe.
You mentioned Fern Lake, and when we were going through those Lincoln School registration cards, there was a lot of people listed for Fern Lake.
Yeah, Fern Lake. That was a black community. Not that it was no whites there, but it was predominantly black. Fern Lake, Ryan, let me see, West End. They had a little group of 7 or 8, 9 families there. What's the other? That was about it.
Do you remember any the black businesses that was around, like stores or shops that people would frequent, or even little hole in the wall?
Yeah, I remembered as a young child, because when the alcohol was booming, 19th Street was the street that all your black businesses was on. Okay. 19th Street, and you had your little whiskey joints and your little clubs, and nightlife was a big thing back when I was a kid. I'm talking now. I'm talking 47, 48, 49. And I remember my brother, W.J., he went to Korea during the Korean War during 1950. And the reason I remember this so well, of course, I wasn't but 8-year-old. He come out and he gave a party, and alcohol was still legal. So I remember that part, because Dad told him, said, yeah, you can have the party here, but now as soon as, if it gets out of hand, everybody's gonna leave. And believe it or not, about an hour into the party, John Smith Sr. run everybody out. But I remember that so well because it was in the 50s. And then right after early middle 50s, I think alcohol left, I'm going to say in 52 maybe, 51, 52, it went dry. And of course, people started scattering. A lot of you black families stayed here. And a lot of them went north and worked for General Motors, and you found a lot of them in Michigan, a lot of them in Chicago. My aunts and uncles, they headed out and went to Chicago area and stayed up there for 30 or 40 years. But right along 19th Street, one side of the street, matter of fact, where Thankful Baptist is now, the property next door was to Thankful, which is in process of belonging to Thankful, but now it's open. And it was a little juke joint sitting there on the corner. When I say juke joint, place where you could, every place had alcohol, but some places you could go in like a little cafe and you could drink and eat. Yeah, and then some places only opened up for nothing but drinking, you know. And across the street was a motel, but I was too young to remember it. I can't think of even the name of it. It was black owned. Down off of Lofbury, he had a black barber shop. So, but it was a few black businesses.
Did you remember any places, you know, because you were in town? I mean, you left and went to the military, but you were in town during segregation. Was there any kind of no-go places in town where you just like, you wouldn't even consider going?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Your Woolworths right there in the middle of Middlesboro, and what was the other one across the street? You could go in. Now you could go in and shop any place. When I say shop, they sold clothes, if they showed furniture or food or whatever. You could shop and spend your money, but you couldn't sit down in none of these places. We got boy's name was Bale, and he was a couple of 3 years older than me, and he went to one of the local, the drugstore, what it was, but they had little stools where you could sit down and drink a soda or whatever. And he decided he didn't sit down. If I had to put a year on it, it would probably, I'm gonna say 50, in the 50s. And he wasn't 12, 13-year-old. He went in and bought him a drink, and he decided to take him a sip of it before he left. In the process of leaving, and the proprietor just slapped it plumb out of his hands off on the floor and told him, "Yeah, you don't eat or drink in here," and he left. But now I remember growing up in the 50s where you had 3 theaters. One of them was Browning. I don't think that the blacks could go to Browning because I never remember going there. But you had the Mannering Theater sitting on the main street up there on Cumberland Avenue. And I remember as a child, you'd go in, buy your ticket, but you come back out and you went around to the side and went up the steps into the balcony area. And all during my raisins year, that's the way it was until, you know, of course, I went in the military in '61, and when they segregated, what was that? When did school break? '65, I believe. Yeah, in a grade, 64, 65. Then all the curtains come down. You could go and sit and eat and drink wherever you wanted to go, you know.
So when you come back, it had been desegregated.
Right. But I tell you what I did do. Yeah, when I come back, it was desegregated. But I come out of Vietnam '67, and when I got out of the hospital and come back, and I went into the barber shop right there at the Mannering Theater, and I cannot think of the barber shop to save my life, but it was right beside the Mannering Theater. I walked in and had a seat because I had been in the hospital a little over 2 months. I needed a haircut. Now the guy said, I went in and sat down. I guess he was the head barber. It was a couple of barbers in there. Had my uniform on. So one of the guys said, "Sir, are you waiting?" He asked me if I was waiting to get a shoe shine. I said, "No, I need a haircut." He said, "Well, we can't cut you. We don't know how to cut your hair in here," he said. He didn't say he wouldn't. And he directed me to a guy that I knew by the name of Sonny Chambers. He cut hair on the side, he was a little jackleg. He said, "Now, Sonny can cut your hair." He said, "Well, we don't know how to cut your hair in here." So I said, "Well, thank you."
Yeah, but he didn't say.
No, you ain't coming in,
coming
right?
in,
No,
yeah.
no, he didn't.
Well, do you remember any? Of course, you were younger. You probably wasn't. Do you remember any civic clubs or groups or Morning Star or, Eastern Star or any groups like that people were involved in?
I remember my uncle Jim Kyle was a Mason. Of course, back in those days they kept it so hush hush. You didn't know what they were about and whatever. They put on their little uniforms and they go to their meetings and stuff, but you didn't. It was more of an undercover type thing, the Mason Brotherhood. Of course, all your Lions, Elks, JCs, Kiwanis, they were white, I'm sorry. And no blacks entered those clubs. I guess it was in the 70s before black folks started joining the Elks and the Kiwanis and the JCs.
Do you remember any of your aunts? Because oftentimes the women had their own little clubs, whatever civic club, or whatever. They don't.
I just remember Uncle being
Mason.
Mason.
I guess probably a lot of the service came out of the church, so it was
Gotcha.
just church.
Right.
Yeah, church related. Do you remember did y'all do the 8th of August here?
Yeah, we did. I didn't really know what it was about. The average black person here in Middlesboro didn't either. They just knew it was a time that black folks did like 4th of July, They get dressed up and go places and have parties. Of course, during my era, you didn't just, after the whiskey left, then you didn't have no bars and no clubs or anything. So if you didn't have some private gathering, then you didn't go to anywhere.
What do you remember folks doing around that time, the 8th of August? Would people gather around in town, or would they go out and picnic? Or
Well, I don't ever recall picnics on 8th of August. It was more a drinking thing for the black community.
partying?
Yeah, partying. Yeah.
So people just get together at homes and after liquor was gone.
And I went in the military, and I come out of, when I went overseas, I was stationed with a bunch of guys from Texas. And those guys started talking about June tea, 19th of June. Man, I can't wait to get home for June. I wonder what in the world are you talking about? What's June tea? Then when they started talking about the Emancipation Proclamation, then I realized, I said, no, we had an 8th of August in the Kentucky area. That's all we knew. And then after I started meeting different guys and found out that around this Kentucky, Tennessee, some of your southern states had 8th of August, a celebration.
Yeah.
But they didn't celebrate. Of course, I guess Texas was the last one getting the word, the Texas area. But we knew it was a holiday, but we really did. It wasn't taught in school.
Yeah. What year was that? Do you remember around what year it was? And guys was talking about Juneteenth.
Yeah, this had to have been. Well, I went in '61. I went overseas in '62, so it had to have been '62, '63 area.
That's. I think that's good because right now I think a lot of people are just now learning about.
Right.
I'm just now learning about Juneteenth, really.
Well, I had never heard of Juneteenth until I went in the military.
Texas guys. Let's see. Okay, you've got some notes, but if there's anything that you got that I missed, or if you want to take a look at them,
Well, I
And
just
you want to make sure, if there's anything you want to make sure that we
yeah.
get.
I had to go back and write a few notes about where my father was buried, and things like that. A lot of things you forget. My mother, which I don't know that I could. I guess I could have made it during her era. When I say that, and she was born in 1915, Edgewood. Same community, Middlesboro, Edgewood, Garmita. If you go up Cumberland Avenue and keep going, you're gonna hit these little towns. Now it's only a handful of people up there. I would say less than 20 families. But used to, that was all part of coal camp, and even in the coal camps, they tell me they would separate blacks from white, even in the coal camps. Okay. And she remembers at 3 or 4 when her father got killed. And he was walking out of Garmita area, coming to Middlesboro to get some groceries. And said he never did, he was overdue. And the roads were terrible. Once a day, the train come out of Middlesboro, went to Garmita area, turned around, stayed for just a little while, loaded up, come back to Middlesboro. Roads was, at the times, she said, in the early 20s, was unpassable. You horse and buggy, a cart or something like that. But there wasn't no cars running around. If it was, poor people couldn't own them anyway. And she said her mother, Sally, headed out to look for Granddad. So I never met him. Like I say, my mother was 3 or 4 when he got killed. And she found him on the railroad track, coming back home. And he had been shot 4 times. And he carried a pistol too. And he had his pistol right beside him. And he had shot a couple or 3 times. His pistol had been fired. But all of his shots was in the back. They brought him home. The train, apparently my uncles, because I had 2 uncles during the time, they were grown men. The train had already been up to the Edgewood, Garmita area, so he had to stay home all night. Wounded, couldn't get him back to Middlesboro. The next morning, the train come up and got him, brought him back, and I think he lived, a day after that. And it was a hate crime because the word got put out that everybody knew who done it. But now he was not a very big man, but now he could hold his own. Mother said ever since she was a little bitty fella, she remembered he always kept a pistol in his back pocket, And of course nothing was ever done about it. Then my Uncle Dan, which was the oldest of her siblings, boys, he worked in the mines. He was a miner. Of course, my granddaddy was too, Worked in the same area, Garmita, up in that area. And I didn't know anything about the mines. Daddy didn't want his kids. He said, "It ain't no work for you. It kills you. You're a young man and you can't breathe. You got coal dust, so just stay out of the mines." None of my brothers went to the mines, but that was a going thing in his time. And Uncle Dan was the oldest of Mother's brothers. And I'm thinking, when she told me this, it's probably was a couple of years difference in the time both of them got killed. But now, he was a regular old miner, but he had a knack of fixing things. He had mechanical skills that was just natural to him. And I don't know whether you know anything the mine set up or not, but during the old era in the mines, you had a pump house, which pumped oxygen, I guess, back into those mines. And it was mechanical driven. And when the pump house was down, the mine was shut down. And when they found out the mine was shut down, then the superintendent comes down and found out what's going on. So they couldn't get the thing fixed. So one of the guys said, well, I said, Dan, you know, Dan's good on all that stuff. Said, I bet Dan can fix it. Well, they went back and got him wherever he was at, brought him up there, and he worked a couple of 3 hours, and he fixed it. The mine opened up, you know, 'cause that's money. When the mine's down, ain't no money moving. So, make a long story short, the white gentleman that run the pump house, he got his job back. I mean, Uncle Dan, only thing he done was stepped in there for a couple of hours and fixed it and went back. So, on another occasion, the superintendent of mines was up there and said, where is Dan, or something to that effect. And he said, well, he works at blah, blah, blah. He said, if he's the only one that can fix that pump house, then he needs to be in the pump house. So they switched him. Well, the other guy got mad, the white gentleman. I can't think of his. I'm thinking Bransom was the name, because Mother told it to me later on. He got mad and left. Well, I don't know how long it was between the incident and when the time Uncle Dan got shot, but they had a lunch break. Uncle Dan come out of the pump house and sat up there by the pump house eating his lunch. And this Bransom guy come up the hill, shot him right in the back of the head and ran off back over the hill. Killed him dead as could be. And they never did run him down either. You know what I mean? Just kind of, I guess they figured, well, leave it alone.
Yeah. And so that was your granddad and his brother.
That granddad and
both
brother
shot.
within a couple of years right there.
And what was your granddad's name again?
His name was Wayman Booker.
Wayman Booker. Wayman Booker and Dan Booker.
Dan. Now, no, Dan was Kyle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
See, Grandma had she had a family of Neils, 2 Neils, and 3 Kyles, and 2 Bookers.
Okay.
Okay. Now, be honest with you, we don't know, because they never, until this day, I don't know whether the Neil and the Kyles was out of wedlock, or if they were in my grandma's younger years. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I know it was like Mother and her mother and her sister that's the youngest to her was Bookers.
Okay.
Then right in the middle you had 2, 3 girls and 2 boys were Kyles.
Okay.
Then the first part of her life
Was Neil? Everybody was Neil.
Yeah, they were Neil.
I'm kin to the Kyles.
Yeah.
Kyles down in Morristown.
You know, yeah, I got a, Lord have mercy, since you remember, Shirley Kyle, and
Yeah.
that's my niece.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dennis.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my nephew.
Yeah. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a small region.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have anything else unless there's anything that you want to make sure people know
No,
about your
that's,
life. And
It was with mixed emotions throughout my life. You know, you say good old days. Well, some of those days wasn't so good, but you made do with what you had, whether it be in the community or your own family. You know, I always had a family that worked. Mama worked. She was a cook by trade, but she done a lot of domestic work. You're running communities, cleaning house and cooking for families, and so it was a job. It put food on the table. But
did she get any income at all or any support from preaching? Did she get a little something?
Believe it or not, right at the end, I think, bless her heart, she was making sure the lights was on, and
So she was paying out of pocket.
Yeah. So it wasn't no. And when they took up offerings, they dig down some of them old women way as deep as they could get their hands in that purse, and what little change they had. So they done good to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
But no, she did a lot of street preaching too, simply because, and it's still prominent today. A lot of denominations don't like women to be in the pulpit, you know. So every black church that I can remember now, before she died, Thankful Baptist, Mount Moriah Baptist, what was the other one? Oh Lord, have mercy. The Methodist Church. She ended up being able to sit in the pulpit before she died.
All of them.
Yeah, one of them. That shows you how progress goes. But no, she died of natural causes.
Long life, 100-something years, 1915.
Yeah. She'd been, her birthday was January the 15th, 1915, so she died in October. So she was pushing 107.
I won't make it that long.
Ain't looking too good for me, but I'm saying. If I live, I'll be 70.
Be 70.
Yeah.
That's a good run.
Oh, I'm talking about 70. I'll be 80 in November.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
Where you? All right. You're looking good.
I'm talking about 70.
You lost a decade. Okay, I'm going to make sure I can cut this off.
Okay.
Look you here.
Now, my wife, I think she's coming in next.
Okay.
Now, she goes back. She ain't quite as old as I am, but she was here during the integration.
Oh, during the
She went
integration
to
process.
Lincoln and went to Middlesboro Public School. So.
Okay. Let's see. All right. So stop.